You're tuned in to More Living with Jim Brogan, broadcast live from the Brogan Financial Studios at News Talk 98.7, where old-fashioned values, expert knowledge, and genuine understanding come together to give you the retirement straight talk you deserve. Jim's a former National Advisor of the Year recipient and a financial educator, and he's here today to talk about how you can live out the best years of your life. Jim and the Brogan Financial team have been helping retirees and pre-retirees across the Southeast for over 20 years in their pursuit of financial independence. You can reach them during the week at 865-862-6800. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn, because More Living with Jim Brogan starts now.
Welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan this morning, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. As you listen to News Talk 98.7 WOKI, it's definitely summer. It's heating up. And, you know, one of my favorite things about the summer is outdoor cooking. It's officially grilling season and smoking season. It's kind of funny because up until the pandemic, I didn't really smoke much meat. And then, but I got a smoker about 6 months before the pandemic. Then the pandemic hit, and now it's like my biggest hobby. I just absolutely love it. And most of the recipes, though, when we start talking about enjoying summertime with family and friends and fellowship, it's all around meat. Whether you love to cook beef or chicken or seafood or veggies, just about anything can be cooked on a grill or a smoker. And so I'm really excited to spend the hour talking about one of my favorite things, which is meat. And I have an old friend of mine in his studio with me, Jim Simpson. Jim is the owner of Simpsons Meat. They're a local butcher shop located off Level Road in West Knoxville. Jim's family has been in the cattle and farming business since 1888. And certainly brings a wealth of knowledge about all things meat. Good morning, Jim. Welcome to More Living.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, 1888.
Yes, sir. That was my great-grandfather, John Simpson, that kind of settled down in the Athens area. And then, of course, my grandfather, Earl Simpson, continued that legacy. And then, of course, my dad took over. And now my brother and I are at the helm of running the farm.
And it started out as a dairy farm?
Yes, sir. We were full-blown dairy, producing grade A milk up until the late 60s, and that's when our grandfather started to transition over to just beef.
So did you always know you were going to go in the family business?
No, sir. My background was more on the financial side up until 2012, and we started looking at opportunities of how to sustain the farming operation and how to go direct with our meats, and that's what we did.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we were talking there off air before we came on air that when I started Brogan Financial in 2001,
right.
Hard to believe it's been almost 23 years.
Right.
Well, no, it has been 20. It was this month in 2001. We worked out of the same building.
That's correct. Yeah, we were.
You were in banking?
I was in the banking business for 18 years, and then, like I said, we had an opportunity to get a relationship started with Whole Foods in 2011, 2012, supplying them directly, and that's when I transitioned away from banking and went back to the family farm.
Now, when it comes to meat, Jim, you know, there's been documentaries, there's all this stuff about how meat is processed in the United States.
Right.
So talk to us a little bit about where the beef comes from and how it raised, how important is it, and how do you raise your cattle?
Right. I think there's a lot there that stress is a big factor in quality of beef. And any time that you can prevent cattle from going through the normal chains, the normal process of being put on a truck and transported to one farm and then transported to a finishing yard, anytime you can avoid that stress, you are actually improving the quality of your meat. And we firmly believe that. So all the cattle that we raise in the farms that participate in our program in Tennessee, these cattle are maintained on individual farms until time of harvest, and at that point we move those to a processing facility in Kentucky, and we do that on a weekly basis, and then we bring the meat back to our USDA cut shop in Knoxville for further processing.
So talk about, like, do you get all your cattle from Tennessee farms?
No, we do not. We have 4 participating farms in Tennessee that actually grow and finish cattle for us that we pick up on a weekly basis. We also have a relationship with a farm out of Texas called 44 Farms. And how we got started with them was they're the largest Angus breeder in the state of Texas, and they have some of the premier Angus genetics. And that's one of the things we also focus on is genetics. Because if you start with good beef, good genetics, you have an opportunity to end with good beef, a much better opportunity. So we started partnering with them and buying bulls for them to use in our Tennessee herds. And from that, what happened was they started saying, well, if you guys are going to use our bulls, why don't you start buying our beef? And so we do also market their beef here in Tennessee as well. We actually get beef from them on a weekly basis, and it's same genetics, the same hormone, antibiotic free, all the same claims that we're selling there in our shop.
Now, you said USDA.
Yes.
So does all your stuff come with a USDA grade?
That's correct. Not a grade. We're not the local Tennessee beef is not technically graded. What we get from 44 Farms is graded, but it is all USDA certified and stamped. Correct.
So let's talk about the different grades.
Yes.
Right. I guess there's choice, there's prime, there's select, there's standard, there's all kinds of.
Yes.
Talk about the difference from one cut to the next. How big of a difference? I mean, I typically buy choice.
Right. In most of the cuts, visually, you're going to be able to obviously see the difference between a choice and a prime in the marbling of the steaks. Okay. In a fillet, are you going to be able to tell that much difference in the eating experience if it's cooked properly? Probably not.
So the more fat would be in the meat.
That is correct.
So the more leaner cuts, you're not really going to notice much difference.
That's correct. And I tell folks all the time, I think going choice is the safest route because there are certain cattle that have been fed too long where you get into yield grade 4s and 5s, and they're able to call those cattle prime when they're graded at the finishing facility. And then when you get the steak, it's almost too fatty. You get into having gristle in that steak, and that's not a good eating experience.
So I guess what they grade it based on, they look at a specific muscle and see how much fat content there is in that muscle?
That's correct. They're looking at the ribeye. They cut the ribeye at the 7th bone, and then that's where the grading's all done.
So is it in the breeding and the genetics? Is that what makes the biggest difference?
That's the start. We are a firm believer. I mean, there's lots of different varying opinions that you can feed cattle to a grade. But to me, if you want the right type of marbling, then you need to really push for the proper genetics. I would also mention here, too, that we have another relationship here locally with a farm in Louisville called 16 Peaks. And they actually raise a Wagyu. It's a red Wagyu. It's called Akaushi beef. And that's a growing relationship where we're starting to harvest more and more cattle. And they really have fine-tuned the process of really giving us a prime product that's a great eating experience.
Yeah, and that would be that's an American Wagyu, right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, so talk about the difference in true Japanese versus American.
Well, it's all, they're all the genetics came from Japan at one time. So the American is just that it's more grown here, raised here.
Crossed with more American cattle?
That's correct, yes. They're crossing, taking full-blown Akaushi, crossing them up with Angus cattle, and then they call them F1s, and it makes it for a very quality product.
Well, I do know, I come to your shop frequently.
Yes, sir.
I love your place.
Right.
I love your meat that y'all harvest there. And I did have one of those American Wagyu from Louisville, which, of course, I live out in Louisville, which is kind of funny.
Right.
So I figure it was raised down the road from me somewhere.
That's correct. It was, yes.
And it was my first time I'd done that and at your shop, and it was unbelievable. But I have found, is most of what you sell choice?
Most of what we sell is probably what I would call high choice. It's somewhere between choice and prime.
Yeah, because in my experience, Jim, your choice, you say high quality choice, it's just as good as other places I get that's prime.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that.
And that's the combination of the genetics and the way the cattle are raised.
I firmly believe that. The way they're raised, we feel we've been doing this 12 years now, and we're just looking for a consistent quality product. And I feel like we've kind of honed in on the genetics to where week to week to week. I mean, not to say that we don't get a bad loin from time to time. We do, because all cattle's different. And that's what, everybody has to understand. We get 2 ribeyes out of 1 cow, and they're all different. But what we're trying to hone in is consistency of quality.
We're visiting with Jim Simpson. He's owner of Simpsons Meats. They've been around since 1888. And they've opened up, when did you open your butcher shop out off Level?
Our butcher shop is really a result of COVID. We were primarily up until COVID in the wholesale business, marketing directly to Whole Foods and other grocery stores and restaurants. And then when COVID happened, we had to look at something different because all of our restaurant business ceased. So we started an online store and started shipping all over the United States. And now what we did at the time also was we owned our own processing plant up until COVID. And then when COVID happened, we actually sold that plant and then opened this USDA shop here in Knoxville. And that's where we do all of our online shipping because we ship all over the United States. And then we also have our retail store there.
And the retail store's been open for, 3 years?
3 years, yes.
3 years, yeah. I remember a friend of mine lives in our subdivision, was the one that told me you had opened a retail shop, right. And I was like, you're kidding.
Right.
And I was like, I got to get out there and get some of that stuff.
Right.
We're visiting with Jim Simpson. He's with Simpsons Meats. When we come back, we're going to talk about things like, organic versus grass-fed. What does that really do to the cattle? We're also going to talk about co-oping a half a cow or a quarter of a cow or even a whole cow. So stay with us as we talk about meat. It's that time of year. We love to grill. We love to smoke. So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm Jim Brogan. We're with you every Saturday from 9 to 10 a.m. and again from 3 to 4 p.m. We're visiting with Jim Simpson. He is the owner of Simpsons Meats. And Simpsons Meat's been around since 1888, and they opened up a retail store about 3 years ago. It's some of the best meat you'll find in the area, in my opinion. And I've known Jim and his family actually a pretty long time. Let's talk, Jim, about, before we get into the specific, let's talk about, we got July 4th coming up.
Correct.
Right. So one of my favorite times of year. Do you have a favorite for July 4th that you like to cook?
Yeah, we do. We like the brisket.
You do a brisket every July 4th?
We smoke a brisket, yeah. And it's tradition we do that.
Now, do you do Texas-style brisket, or do you do your own, tell me how you do your brisket.
We more or less are just seasoning and then slow smoking for about 20 hours.
You never wrap it?
We do. We actually wrap it in aluminum foil for a certain amount of time, pull it off, and then we let it rest and then put it back on with butcher paper.
So crisp up the bark again?
That's correct, yeah.
I've not heard of people doing that where they do the aluminum foil, then finish it with the butcher paper. Right. Usually people do one or the other.
Right. There's so many different approaches to this, and that's one of the beauties of actually owning a butcher shop is we get to learn all the different techniques that people are trying, and they always report back to the results, and it's always fun to learn the different approaches.
It is. What kind of smoker do you have? What style smoker?
We have an old-timey, it's a 500-gallon propane tank that we welded and built and put a firebox on, and that's what we use at the farm to do all of our smoking on.
Well, that sounds kind of like my father-in-law. He has a big oil drum almost he fashioned to make a propane.
That's correct.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah.
I do a pellet smoker,
right.
And I know some people are like, "Oh, that's too easy," but
right.
It's hard to beat the way it smokes.
Absolutely.
I mean, it produces so much moisture.
Right.
You don't need. I never like when I do brisket. I want to put water in there.
Right.
Because the pellets produce so much moisture. Okay, so I mentioned before the break. Talk about organic and grass. Let's start with grass fed.
Right.
Does grass fed? I know it does chemically change some things, when the cows are fed grain, because their natural diet is grass, right?
That's correct.
So how does grass-fed beef taste compared to grain fed or grain finished?
Right. We offer both. We do not have an organic beef product. Let me speak to organic just for a second, if you don't mind. Just the organic is to be a true certified organic farm. There's certain requirements that you have to meet. And it's like a 7-year period that your farm has to be pesticide-free, fertilizer-free, and there's a lot of other things that you have to do. And we looked at that years back to say, do we want to become an organic farm? And what we came to, we do not use pesticides on our farm for spraying of weeds. We use a very intentional rotational grazing plan for our cattle to be rotated from paddock to paddock, and we use that as our control for weeds. But the only thing that we do that will keep us from being organic is we do fertilize our property in the spring for the grass growth. And what we thought about the organic without fertilizing based on our grass, our temperatures, it was not sustainable. So we didn't go that route. So that's the organic side. The grass-fed, most of our grass-fed goes to the Whole Food stores in Tennessee.
Well, it's kind of funny because, like, I don't know that I've had grass-fed, but right. I seem to hear that it doesn't taste the same.
It can be different. It's all dependent upon the time of year, too, that you buy the grass-fed. It's all based on their diet. Like right now, cattle are heavy, eating a lot of grass. So a true grass-fed that comes currently off the grass is going to have, to me, it's going to have a gamier taste to it, more grass taste to it, versus a grain finish. Now, I would say all of our cattle here in Tennessee are what we call pasture-centered, meaning they're never put into a true traditional feedlot. So they always have access to grass, even though they'll be fed corn silage during the day. They still go back out and eat grass. So our cattle are never, the Tennessee cattle are never confined to a feedlot. But the difference between the grass and the grain, there is a taste difference to me. But
do you taste more difference in a fattier piece than a leaner piece, or no?
I just think overall, like the grind to me has a gamier taste to it for the most part. Not to say that it's bad; it's just different. So I think it's just a preference of what you're looking for. I tell everybody that comes in the shop we will ask them what their preference is, and most people will tell us, well, what do you think? They don't really have a preference. And so we always push them more toward what we call the pasture-centered beef.
And if it's grass-fed and grain-finished, is that kind of like does that end up being more like a grain product?
It does, because they're going to get about 6 months of that corn silage, that corn diet, and that's mostly what they're going to eat. On that, but they'll still have access to grass, but their primary diet in that last 6 months is corn silage.
Talk about so the grain finished is about 6 months.
That's correct.
Oh yeah, I never knew that. I always figured it probably 30, 60 days. I never knew that.
No, it's typically truly about 6 months for you to get them to that finished weight. It's a weight thing. Now
you have USDA.
Yes.
Talk about the difference in USDA and certified Angus beef.
This USDA actually monitors certified Angus beef. Certified Angus beef when it comes through the harvesting facility, it has to be a certain percentage black-hided, and it has to either be high choice or prime grade. And those are the two stipulations that the USDA graders are looking at for it if it is a true CAB harvesting facility. They're the ones that are actually calling it CAB or not.
And there's not a lot of places carry that, right?
It's more common than it used to be. It's most of your larger processing facilities do have CAB graders on because Angus is your primary breed in the United States. I mean, they've just the Angus Association's done a great job of marketing themselves, and then also they've done a really good job of capturing the true genetic profiles of the actual breed and what you should expect.
So if it says certified Angus choice, it would be kind of a high grade choice.
If it's certified Angus beef, it's a higher than choice. That's correct. It's one step up at a minimum. It's because you got select, you got choice, high choice, and prime in grades.
Okay, and most of what y'all carry is high choice.
That's
and
correct.
prime.
High
you
choice
do carry
and prime.
some prime.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you can buy a whole cow. People can buy a whole cow.
Absolutely.
They can do a quarter cow, half cow. You ship all over the country,
we do.
right?
We ship a lot of half cows all over the country, which has been amazing to us. And that all started during COVID when people had a fear of running out of food, I think. But it's continued. We have a lot of repeat business that people come back and actually buy a half cow or a quarter cow every year now. And so, it's I always make a strong recommendation and ask people a lot of questions about if you truly want a half cow, because I want to see people get through that in a year, and we work with them on the actual actually setting it up to where we be sure they're going to use all the cuts. Because if somebody's not going to use a whole brisket, we don't want them to get a whole brisket. We'll go ahead and put that in grind for them. But we try to be sure that people, when they buy a half cow, that they're going to be able to get through it in a year, and they're not just buying it out of fear. So anyway, that's something we push.
Well, let's talk about storage. When you buy a half cow or quarter cow or whatever, right. I mean, you're butchering it and cutting it up and preparing it all, right?
That's
shipping
correct.
it
Yes, that's
freeze packed.
That's correct.
How long? So is a year about the going? How long you can keep it in the freezer without damaging or freezer burn?
It's probably longer than that. We roll stock everything. Has a really good seal to it, so it's probably longer than that. We've never done any test on it, but I feel like if you can get through the meat in a year, it's always going to be good. It's probably last longer than that, depending upon the conditions that it's in. But we kind of give it a year to that shelf life.
So with your cattle all mostly coming from Tennessee
That's
farms,
correct.
and you got the Texas farm,
right?
Does that affect much the size of the cattle if they're raised one way versus another? Because and the only reason I think of that is because you think of chickens get fed up all this stuff and they get bigger and then they're more weight. How does that work with beef?
Well, the grass fed obviously finishes at a smaller weight. Those are because and we harvest those all at about the same age, at about 22 months of age. But they're usually about 11 to 1,200 pounds at the most, really closer to the 1,100 pound mark. Okay, because they're just not pushed. They're eating grass, and their average daily gain is going to be about 1.5 pounds a day at most.
And then how does that compare to a grain fed?
A grain fed is, they're fed that last 6 months, push really hard. They're given all the corn silage they can eat, and they're going to gain 4 to 5 pounds a day. So their finishing weight's going to be closer to 1450.
Okay, so a good 25% larger.
Yes.
That's a big difference.
But most of that weight's going to come in grind. 60% of the animal ends up in grind, and that's what people don't understand. So to be in this business, you always have to have your outlets for grind. You got to be able to move grind.
We're visiting with Jim Simpson. He's with Simpsons Meats, as it's that time of summer when we start grilling and cooking out and smoking meat. When we come back, we're going to talk to him a little bit more about what to look for when you're buying meat at the store. And then maybe we'll get him to share a few really good recipes or seasoning tips for when we do our steaks. I'll also have our dollars and cents segment. What the Fed made an announcement this past week about interest rates. They're going to hold them steady. What does that mean for you? And why is Fed Chairman Powell saying things look pretty decent in the economy, but people don't feel that way? So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
This is More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. We're getting close to July 4th, and it's the middle of the summer, and I love this time of year. I love to be outside. I love to grill. I love to cook out. I love to smoke meat. Today we've got Jim Simpson. He's with Simpsons Meats. They've been around since 1888. Great-grandfather, right?
That's correct.
It's pretty awesome. They got great place out there off Level Road, a retail store. It's one of my favorite places, really my favorite place locally to get meat. Before we get back to Jim and talk a little bit about some recipes and how to really pick stuff out at a grocery store, it is time for Dollars and Cents.
Most out of your retirement? For all the years of your retirement? That's the primary goal of More Living with Jim Brogan and our Dollars and Cents segment, where we provide you with an important financial tip that will help positively impact the quality of your life in retirement. And now, here's Jim with this week's Dollars and Cents tip.
The Federal Reserve met this week to discuss the interest rate environment and inflation, and this has been my number one issue that I think we face economically. You never know if something's lurking under the surface that might pop its head out and be a real problem. But the how inflation is handled and how interest rates are handled, to me, is probably the number one thing, at least in my opinion. And they did announce this week no rate cut right now, no rate increase. And according to the notes, all of the policymakers pretty much agreed in their base scenarios they don't see rate increases. But we started this year with the Fed saying with people saying maybe 6 or 7 rate cuts this year, and the rest of this year they're saying, the Fed now saying 1, maybe 2, but it's really shrunk in the number of rate cuts. And the reason for that is inflation has continued to be persistent. Now, the numbers that came out this week, or have come out in the last couple of weeks, inflation has come down just a little bit. It's back in the low 3s. And according to Chairman Powell, there has been, quote, modest further progress, end quote, toward its 2% inflation objective. And so, they are seeing it start to come down a little bit, but the Fed has been very, very telegraphic in saying that they're not going to cut rates if employment is good, there's not high unemployment, the economy's going well, companies are making money and seeing GDP growth. They're going to be reticent to cutting rates, as long as inflation's up there in the 3s. Now, interestingly enough, it's come up, why is the sentiment of everyday Americans so sour on the economy? And it's an interesting question, and I've talked about it a lot on this show. You look at the economic data, and it really is pretty decent. But Americans don't feel that way. And I think there are a couple of big reasons why. I think the number one reason is the inflation. It's if they say 3.2, 3.3% over the last 12 months, that's not a huge high number. Certainly higher than it was, for 15 years leading up to coming out of the pandemic. But it's on top of that 8.5%, 9% number we had not too long ago. So prices aren't coming down, and when we go to the grocery store, we feel it. You just can't get out of the grocery store anymore with much stuff for less than $100, I've found. There's a couple of other things. There's this perception versus reality. I think the media coming into a presidential election, they're always going to grandize that. They're going to always exaggerate things to try to get viewers, and it's kind of sensational reporting because they want to get eyeballs. But I think the number one thing is inflation and what it's costing you when you live your life, go to the grocery store, all those kinds of things. So now what does that mean for you? That means that we don't want to make short-term emotional decisions with how we handle our investments. With the Fed raising rates the way they did last year, you wouldn't think, typically if you look at a full economic cycle where they raise rates, they bring inflation down, unemployment starts to creep up, and then they start lowering rates again. The last part of that hadn't happened. The slowdown in the economy and increases in unemployment, it's up a little bit, but it hadn't really happened. So it's kind of shocking, to be honest with you. People have been predicting recession for a couple of years now. So I guess my takeaway is your investment plan, when you invest and take risk in things like stock funds and diversified portfolios, you're doing it for a point in time years from now. You're not doing it for next month or next quarter or even next year, because in the short term, the market is completely unpredictable. You want to be shooting for a target at least 5 or 6 years out, and that way you have time to run through some of these cycles.
That's our Dollars and Cents segment for this week. You can find this week's Dollars and Cents segment and others by visiting BroganFinancial.com.
Check us out online, BroganFinancial.com. You can click on radio and podcast our shows. You can also go to Spotify or Apple Podcast. We've also got some great resources online, reports on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and different things. That's going away at the end of next year. Taxes are going up. For all of our resources, go to broganfinancial.com and click on resources, and you can download some complimentary guides. My goal is to keep you informed so you can make prudent decisions that can impact the quality of your life in a major, significant, positive way. Now, Jim Simpson's with us this week. It's one of my favorite topics is beef and cooking and grilling and smoking. I thought that was interesting that brisket is your go-to for July 4th, because in this part of the country, you hear different things. So I want to talk about a few recipes you might have, or rubs and things like that, because I know you sell some of that stuff at your retail store, some rubs. But if we're going into a grocery store and we're buying meat,
right,
what should we be looking for?
Right. Well, I think the first thing is you want to be sure that it is all comes from the U.S. And that's something I would look very closely for, because we do import a lot of beef into the U.S. So I would try to look for that stamp of approval that it is U.S.-raised beef. I would also try to shop at a place where you do have a relationship with the butcher, where most of those know what box it came out of. And so I would talk with the butcher, have a relationship with the butchers at that place, and work closely with them on sourcing the products that you're looking for. I would always try it on certain cuts, such as steaks. I would always try to stay with a choice grade or better. I think if you get down into the select or no roll cuts, then you're going to get into a lot of tough beef.
Let's talk about some maybe overlooked cuts of meat that are really, really good.
Right.
What would be your favorite one or two cuts of meat that may be under the radar that people don't know much about?
Yeah, there's several on the beef side that I think are starting to gain more popularity. I think the tri-tip is something from a smoking standpoint that we sell a lot of tri-tip.
Yeah, and that's real popular out in California, right? But it's spread a lot.
That's correct. That's a West Coast recipe that came this way. We actually have a rub that we suggest for the tri-tip.
And that's part of ultimately the sirloin, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Very good cut of meat, cooks up very well, and at a lower price point than the tenderloin. And obviously, that's what we're trying to do is offer, a tenderloin. A 8-ounce fillet at our place is $18, and we're trying to always look at what can we do at a lower price point for folks, but give them a very similar quality.
Now, a cut that I discovered a few years ago was picanha,
yes,
or the coulette,
yes,
which is also part of the sirloin.
That's
Can
correct.
you talk a little bit what's the difference between that and the tri-tip?
It comes.
It's going to be. It's very similar, right?
Yeah, it's going to cook up very similar. The coulette's going to have a little more fat to it.
It's got bigger. It's the fat cap,
yeah,
right?
Fat cap. That's correct. Not the internal fat's going to be very similar, but the fat cap's going to be larger. So if you wanted to cook something and let the fat roll off of it to get that flavor, that's typically what people go to.
And I guess that's the most popular thing. That's real popular. It's like Brazilian steakhouses.
That's correct.
A lot of picanha or the coulette.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah. What are a couple of other kind of overlooked cuts of meat that you think work real well, especially if you marinate it or really know how to cook it?
Yeah, obviously your skirt steaks and your flank steaks are good marinating products, and we sell a lot of pre-marinated flank and skirt at our shop, where we actually go ahead and seal it with marinades in it, and we push those for taco meats and things of that nature. Another cut that we sell a lot of that's kind of a new cut, comes off the chuck, is a Denver steak. Very well marbled, good eating experience at a much lower price point than a regular ribeye.
Yeah, and it's not as fatty though as a ribeye, right?
No, it is not, and it typically will have a finer fat line to it, meaning very fine marbling type fat in it, and most of the fat will cook down on it.
What is your favorite cut of steak? If you got to make a great steak dinner for you and your family, one steak dinner, what you cooking?
Yeah, I'm either going to go with the strip or the ribeye. I mean, the wife always goes with the filet.
Yeah.
But I'm a ribeye or a strip guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of all the above, I guess. But
Right.
I guess my go-to is a filet, though. I love a good filet. But,
Right.
and you know this about me, but because I've been talking some to Jason out at your shop, I'm going to have him cut up a ribeye for me because I'm going to separate that cap, that spinalis, from the inner part.
Right.
Do you have many people do that? I mean, that's considered the king's cut of steak, right? The ribeye cap.
It is. We do get requested a lot, but the challenge for it sometimes is what do you do with the rest of the ribeye? So it becomes a pretty expensive endeavor because you pretty much mess up most of your ribeye when you do that. But we do it quite a bit.
But you can take the center part and cut it into center cut ribeye fillets.
You could.
Right?
It just makes them smaller. That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. But then you're trimming out all that fat.
Yes, that's correct.
That later. All right, we're visiting with Jim Simpson. When we come back, Jim also, he and his partner run Walnut Kitchen in Maryville, one of the finest restaurants in the Knoxville area. So I want to talk to him a little bit about that and then ask him how to cook the perfect thick steak. How do you get a good sear? How do you do it at home? How do you season it, get a great sear, and have it even all the way through? So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
This is More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm Jim Brogan, and I'm visiting with Jim Simpson, an old friend of mine. We go way back, and he is one of the owners of Simpsons Meats. They have an online, they ship all over the country. They sell whole cows, half cows, quarter cows, but then they also have a retail shop out off Lovell Road. It's really my go-to for getting great meat when I want to cook some great steak. But you actually are in the restaurant business too, right? You have Walnut Kitchen.
That's correct.
When did you decide to open a Walnut Kitchen? Like, what led you to doing that?
Well, we had obviously we sell to restaurants, and we had created some relationships with chefs in that world, and we had some chefs that had approached us and said, hey, would you ever help us start a restaurant? And when we started those conversations, we were actually looking at trying to open up a burger joint. And because obviously 60% of the animal becomes grind, and so we were trying to figure out how to move more grind at the time. But we looked for a couple of years about opening a restaurant, and finally decided on doing a more of a steak place versus a burger joint. And we opened that in 2017, and it's been the community in Blount County and Knox County has just been very, very supportive of it. They do use all of our beef there in the restaurant.
It's all Simpsons beef.
That's correct. And so it's been a good endeavor. It's been a good testing ground for us to be able to know that we're putting the best product out there possible for our customer base.
So if I'm cooking a big, thick steak,
correct,
1.5 to 2 inch steak.
That's correct.
Filet or ribeye or strip, whatever it is.
Right.
What's the best way to cook that steak? There's debates. What's your favorite way to cook that steak?
Right. Well, I mean, I think trying to get the grill up to the highest temperature possible to sear it first, and then I would go back to always. I'm just a salt and pepper guy. Matter of fact, we have a great salt and pepper blend that we get from J.O. Dickinson out of West Virginia. That's just, to me, just perfect for the seasoning. So season it first, sear it very good on both sides, and then bring that temperature up to about 130, 135 internal temp, and then pull it off and let it rest.
Do you keep it straight over the heat for the entire cook, or do you move it? Like when I do it, Jim, I sear it,
right, and
then I move it to the other side on indirect heat, right, and let it come up to temp. How do you do it?
I pretty much keep it the same, but that's not to say that your way's not the best way.
Do you leave the heat real high once you sear it, or do you say you turn it down some so it's not too thick in the doneness on the outside?
That's correct. So you're not charring it. But
and you're a salt and pepper guy.
Salt and pepper.
You're a purist.
I mean, if you start with real meat, good meat, you shouldn't have to marinate. You shouldn't have to sous vide. You shouldn't have to any of those things.
How long should I leave my steak out at room temperature before I cook it? When should I season it, and then how long should I leave it at room temperature?
I mean, I like to leave them out for 30 minutes, season them, leave them out for 30 minutes. But I think the bigger difference is letting them rest before you start to actually eat them after they cooked.
Yeah, so 5 or 10 minutes. Let them
5 or 10 minute rest. That's correct.
That's crucial. My family, especially my wife's side of the family,
right,
and then my 2 daughters, they are always making fun of me and getting on me because I'm like, we got to let that sit for 10 minutes.
That's right.
But they'll ruin it if they cut in it too soon, right?
That's right. That's correct. It has to rest.
How long do you let your brisket sit in a cooler?
Matter of fact, we will briskets. We do smoked tenderloins a lot of times. Even we smoke a lot of tenderloins there at the shop, and we'll wrap them in aluminum foil. We'll hook them to about 120 internal temp, wrap them in aluminum foil, put them in a cooler, and let them sit for 3 or 4 hours. And I promise you, when you open those up, they're still warm, and you slice them, and it melts in your mouth.
I guess you need at least an hour, but really close to 2 on a good brisket.
Yes, that's
now,
correct.
what about y'all do carry some pork?
We do. We carry a Creekstone product. It's an antibiotic, hormone-free, cage-free product. It comes out of Kansas. We do not have a local pork product. We tried some different local programs, but we just couldn't get the consistency either from a supply or quality.
So the focus is beef. Now, in your retail shop, you do carry some chickens.
We carry a variety
here and
of
there.
products. Yeah, we carry
and some seafood even.
Yeah, we carry some seafood. Wolf's Fish out of Boston. We started with them through the restaurant. It's a really high-quality product. Really.
Now, is that usually frozen?
It comes in frozen, and we sell it frozen. And we sell most of our pork frozen, and our chicken is fresh for about a week, and then it goes frozen. And we use a product from Joyce Farms. It's an antibiotic, hormone-free chicken that's not local. It comes out of North Carolina, but a very, very quality product. We everything we do, we really focus on the quality side.
Now, you have a salt and pepper blend. You also have some other rubs.
We do.
And one of them, that smoky, what's it called? The smoky
dust.
I bought that. I had not used it. I'm kind of a salt and pepper and garlic.
Right.
I'm an SPG kind of guy.
Right.
And but I bought that product, and it's quite good.
Yes. We carry several different rubs there. Meat Church rubs, Smoky Dust, which I think comes out of Chattanooga. Very good product. And so we have do
you have coffee rub? I think you have a coffee rub.
We do have a coffee
rub.
rub.
Pretty good. Now, you've got a great coffee rub fillet at your restaurant.
We do. That's a Vienna coffee out of Maryville.
Okay, so they're creating the rub for you?
That's correct. They created the rub for us, and it does very well.
But that's not the rub you sell in the store.
We do sell, I think we actually sell that rub in the store.
Ooh,
I think.
Because my wife, last 2 times we gone there, she's gotten that coffee rub filet, and she just loves it. And
you can get the rub at the shop.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. We're visiting with Jim Simpson this morning. He owns Simpsons Meats. When you look at going into the summer, what are your do you have favorite side dishes?
Yeah,
that you like to cook to go with grilling or smoking? Yeah,
I think this part of the world, what we've learned being in the restaurant business is the East Tennessee market, everybody loves potatoes in whatever form they come in.
And that's funny because my wife's from South Carolina, and they're big on rice. And I remember when we started dating, I'd always go down there, they'd have rice, and I wanted potatoes.
That's correct. I mean, we debate and go round and around at the restaurant all the time about our menu offering, and it's like, can we have too many potato offerings, whether it's a baked potato, whether it's a smashed potato, whatever it is? And I don't think you can because people love potatoes.
What do you find people like the most for vegetables?
I think whatever's in season. One of the things
that's a good word right there.
Yeah, we try to push at the Walnut Kitchen. Where we call ourselves farm forward, so we're really trying to support when available what's available in the local market. So we got right now we've got a new street corn appetizer, which we will be using local corn once it comes in. We'll be using local okra, local tomatoes, all those types of things.
So, Jim, how can people find you both online and then, of course, where your retail shop is?
Yeah. It's simpsonsmeats.com is our website. You can go there and place your order. I think if you're going to pick it up at our retail store and you want to place an order, just call the shop. We'll take care of you and get your order. It's a little cheaper to pick up at the shop than it is to order online because we do have some freight built into that. So appreciate you having us. And,
so Simpsons
online.
Meats,
That's
Simpson,
correct.
SIMPSON, Simpsons Meats, and then you're right out there off Level Road.
That's correct.
Just west of the FedEx building.
That's correct. 10830 Murdoch Drive.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for being with us. It's been great to have you on.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, that's Jim Simpson. Known Jim and his family for a long time, and they just a really great quality product out at their store, and then also through their online distributorship and then through their restaurant out at Walnut Kitchen. So many thanks to him. I do want to just mention again, with the interest rate sensitivity right now and the fact that the Fed is continuing to hold rates steady to get inflation down, it's just really important to know how to capitalize on today's interest rate environment and insulate your portfolio from short-term mistakes. So be sure and measure the diversification in your portfolio, measure ultimately the risk, and make sure that it can withstand your financial plan. And, of course, a big part of that is how you structure income. We visited today with Jim, as I mentioned. We've talked about great cooking and grilling and smoking meat, because great times and great fellowship provides for more living so you can live the best years of your life your way. Thanks to Wayne for engineering the board. Thank you to Jill for helping produce the show. Thank you so much for tuning in this week as we've been visiting with Jim Simpson of Simpsons Meats. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Have a very blessed weekend.
The views expressed by Jim Brogan and his guests are not that of Cumulus Media. Any discussion of financial, legal, and tax planning strategies is not intended to be individualized advice and is general in nature. Always consult with your advisor for advice specific to your needs. This program's content does not represent a recommendation of any particular security, strategy, or investment by Jim Brogan or Brogan Financial Incorporated.